Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Stories of Horror. Another episode we dive into the deeps and unknowns of the world. Today's episode is about Jack the Ripper, the infamous and horrific killer that took place back in the 1800s, who was unidentified. They never found out his identity. They couldn't find out who he was. They didn't know his plan or what he was doing and why did he kill, and they didn't know any of that. So we're gonna dive into some of those details around those killings and around Jack the Ripper. So sit back and relax and enjoy the show. Without further ado, hit the intro. In the 1800s, London East End was a place that was viewed by citizens to come there and to start a new life and businesses. But the district was notorious for squalor, violence, and crime. Prostitution was only illegal if the practice caused a public disturbance, and thousands of brothels and low-rent lounging houses provided sexual service during the late 19th century. At that time, the death of a murder of a working girl was rarely reported in the press or within the news. The reality was the ladies of the night were subject to physical attacks, which sometimes resulted in death. Among these common violent crimes was the attack of English prostitute Emma Smith, who was beaten and raped with an object by 4 men. Smith, who was later died of peritonitis, is remembered as one of the many unfortunate female victims who were killed by gangs demanding protection, money. But later, the series of killings that began in August 1888 stood out from the other violent crimes of that time. Marked by sadistic butchery, they suggested a mind more sociopathic and psychopathic, hateful than most citizens could ever understand. The killer, who is known as Jack the Ripper, was also called the Whitechapel Stabber and all types of names, and his reign of terror beginning in August and ending in November 1888, he murdered at least 5 women from knowledge of the police. The 5 women who were murdered in order were Mary Ann Nichols, who was found August 31st, 1888, Annie Chapman, who was found September 8, 1888, Elizabeth Stride, found September 30th, 1888, Catherine Eddowes, also found September 30th, 1888, and Mary Jane Kelly, found November 9th, 1888. What led all the killings and linked to one killer was that they all were prostitutes, and they all had something similar within the crime scene. In each instant, the victim's throat was cut and the body was mutilated in a manner indicating that the murderer had some knowledge of the human anatomy. Jack the Ripper didn't just take them out with a knife. He disemboweled the body, removing organs such as kidneys, uteruses, and his crime seemed to portray an appearance for the female gender or prostitution in general. Jack the Ripper's murders suddenly stopped in the fall of 1888, but London citizens continued to demand answers that would never come. Even more than a century later, the ongoing case, which has spawned an industry of books, films, and TV series and shows, was met with a number of questions and lack of evidence and misinformation and false testimonies. And until this day, the identity of Jack the Ripper is still unknown. For years, people have speculated about his identity. Commonly cited suspects include Montague Druid, a barrister and teacher with an interest in surgery, Michael Ostrog, a Russian criminal and physician, and Aaron Kaminsky, a Polish immigrant who lived in Whitechapel. But none of these had concrete evidence behind them, leaving the identity of Jack the Ripper still unknown. Okay guys, as you've seen, Jack the Ripper still unidentified to this day. They had some speculations, like I mentioned before at the end of the video, about some guys who they thought were Jack the Ripper, but they didn't really have any concrete evidence. And I don't think they ever will have evidence fully to try to like depict who Jack the Ripper actually was, because that was in the late 1800s, 1888. So that was so long ago. Jack the Ripper most likely is, of course, not most likely, but he's probably dead by now. But they don't know. They don't have anything like that really. 'Cause everything was really kind of like made up stuff. They had some false testimonies that was kind of like tampered, and a lot of different things that surrounded it. So no one really knows the concrete thing around Jack the Ripper. The only thing they have really is how the murders was and how all those murders were similar. So they linked them together, kind of like the Boston Strangler. They caught a guy in custody, but people don't really believe that that was the guy who was actually the Boston Strangler. They believe that the other guy was Boston Strangler, who was there with them, who was watching his every word and stuff like that. But they didn't have any evidence surrounding that either, so they kind of like just left him free off the hook as well. So it's a lot of speculations. Most of these mysteries going on, especially in the old times when technology wasn't the most advanced. So a lot of the guys got away with a lot of different things, a lot of different stuff. We've seen, like I mentioned before, Boston Strangler, Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, of course. And of course, there's other guys too who have a lot of unsolved mysteries. The Golden State Killer literally got caught. Was it like 2 or 3 years ago? 3 years ago, he was almost like 80 years old. Like that, they finally got him. He was a kidnapper and a rapist and all types of stuff. He did some horrific things, terrible things to people. And they finally caught him like almost like 50 years later, like that, when he was an old man. So a lot of the crimes that happened back in the old days, in the old time, a lot of people didn't really know anything, and they just had a lot of speculations and made things up just to make the public go to sleep at night. Like, oh, we got some identities of some of the guys we got them in custody now, or they make some things up like that just to like kind of ease the stuff a little bit. Like in the old days, they did a lot of that. Like they'll either like put some fake names down, or they'll falsely arrest somebody. There's a lot of guys in jail who are arrested for crimes they didn't do. You see people a lot nowadays too as well. They'd be like, oh, this guy was arrested for a crime that happened in Chicago, but guess what? The guy during that time that happening, the guy lived in New York. So how did he commit that crime? And then like you look at like they go through some of the evidence of some of the old cases of people who are in jail like that, who are in jail for a long time for crimes they didn't do. They'd be like, what? How does evidence stand? And why is he still in jail? And then they get him out like that. But you can't get time back. So I'm glad there's a lot of more like people around like different organizations and stuff like that, trying to get people out of jail who was falsely put in jail like that, because of the old time they didn't have evidence. They just speculated and put a guy in there based off their gut instinct or something, which is not a good idea when you're doing like law, of course. But yeah, that's all I got for this video, really, like that. There's a lot of these unknown solved cases, mystery cases, and we're gonna be discussing more and more of them throughout time. Let me know if you like this video. Leave a like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below telling me who you think Jack the Ripper was, or what his motives fully were. But that's all I got for this video, and I'll see you guys next time on Stories of Horror. Peace out.